Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a continuation of the White Matrix series that I made about 4 years ago. I guess you could say I've been pretty busy. However, I received requests on making more about the White Matrix and more specifically about how it's affecting the present war that we're trying to and will start in Venezuela unless they find a different outlet. I'm going to give a little small reading. This is going to be very brief from the most beloved military leader in history of any faction. He was a U.S. Marine, but he was also a pacifist. His name was General Smedley Butler. I will try to put a link to reading his book called War's a Racket in the description if I can remember. But here, let me read this for you. This is very, very important to tell you what's going on in Venezuela. General Smedley Butler says, war is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are recognized in dollars and not in human lives. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of very few, at the expense of very many. Out of war, a few people make huge profits. In the World War II, a mere handful garnered the benefits of the conflict. At least 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires were made in the United States during World War II. That many admitted their huge blood gains in their tax returns. How many other millionaires falsified their income tax returns? No one knows. Now, that's a quick quote from General Smedley Butler's book called War is a Racket. So to understand more, I would still suggest you go through the entire White Matrix series that I made 4 years ago. It's far more conclusive with evidence of the history of this White Matrix in this country. However, why Venezuela? In summary, this international satanic some call colonial, but really it's because they're satanic. And because they're satanic, they can be colonialists without a conscience. So, the same ones that brought you slavery and such other things in America to the most brutal conclusion is the same ones that like to invade other countries to take their resources. Now, the war in Russia has not gone the way that the United States or the Satanic States of these people whom General Smedley Butler mentioned, the few that gain profits from this. The war hasn't gone well for them in Russia, and the idea of taking Russia and all of its resources, its oil and its precious metals, which are vitally needed for these few, hasn't worked out. They then tried to go to China. That has not worked out. They went to Burkina Faso as well as other African nations. Right now, they're not telling you about the war that's in Somalia. That's even more brutal than that area. Also for profit and for oil and other things. Well, that thing is also that machine that has lost its oil reserves, that has lost its precious metal reserve, and has lost conclusively to Russia not being destroyed and Ukraine not taking the Russian pipelines that go through Ukraine and into Europe, and that has for decades been supplying all of Europe with oil that the U.S. and that few could make a substantial amount of finances from. So why Venezuela? Well, Venezuela at one point, in fact, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, Venezuela was a puppet government of the U.S. But as the U.S. lost its control there, where 90% of the people were impoverished despite the country or the few being exceptionally wealthy, well, the governments there said, you know what, we're going to start doing more for our people. And so they started doing that, and the United States could not have that. Or rather, its overlords could not have that. And so what eventually happened was that there was first a coup attempt, a major coup attempt that's more popular, called the Bay of Piglets. I highly suggest that you research that, called the Bay of Piglets. It was synonymous with the Bay of Pigs, which was under the Kennedy administration. But I digress. The whole point is this. Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves in the world. It also has precious metals, and it's also in the region of the United States. And the United States collectively is the largest historical slave plantation in history. If you include both the mainland of the United States as well as the islands in which plantations have been and are still operative, the United States is the largest slave plantation in history and remains so. And so they want to extend that back into Venezuela, because Venezuela is so close in proximity to the United States that the United States can utilize these precious metals not only for itself, but also to continue to sell to Europe, which is being constantly cut off from their own policies of actions against China and against Russia and all these nations that do have precious metals and oil in their region. They have decided to make war against their own people, and they've decided, well, we'd rather deal with the United States. Well, the United States says, well, we need to get those resources in which we can supply to Europe and continue this money train. Well, unfortunately for the United States, just like every fading empire, its influence left when they started sanctioning nations, and it became concluded by every nation that the United States cannot be trusted with anything financial. So now that system is going into the trash, and these people who have decided to fight back little by little around the world to diminish the importance and the power of these few. This is going to get a lot worse. Now, as America and Satanic States and the collective of Israel and the collective of Britain see that their empire has completely crumbled, and that the multicultural world in general is shunning off one collective empire and preferring to work more together as nations. So if you want to know what's going on with Venezuela, as I said in summary, it's the same thing it's always been. Nothing has changed. Colonialism, Satanism, whatever you want to call it, they want to take all the resources from Venezuelan people, who are even to this day 80% impoverished because of U.S. sanctions and policies. So let that sink in, that this is what you're dealing with. Once again, this is Marshall Sanders. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for watching this video. Like, subscribe, and ask questions, because ultimately I'm not the authority on information. You are. You're just not aware that you are. So if you just go and research these things, don't listen to anyone's narrative. Don't listen to my narrative. That's why I asked you to ask questions. But I want you all to learn what is true, because everything you've been told is a lie. Have a good day.